doing different things. Here you have you have an exhibition by the Institut d'Arquitectura Avançada, and now here we have a lecture with the master, which is usually in our museum, and that we share with the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And thank you for coming, Victoria, from Duke University, to talk about Smartscapes. Smartscapes, which is, as you know, as polemic as Smart City. So thanks for coming and enlightening us about the project. So now Dr. Muñoz will talk because he knows much better what to say than me, and I'll go there and just attend your lecture.
Thank you, John. So we thank the MUHBA and we thank the MUHBA director for being with us, introducing the session. It's really nice to be able to offer you this third conference inside this series of conferences that we are offering inside the Landscape and Heritage Masters we have with the MUHBA. The other two lessons, they were offered in other MUHBA sites in Barcelona, in Toro de la Rovira and in Casa del Agua. So the idea is just bringing the discussion we have in our Masters on Heritage and Urban Landscape to those places in which the MUHBA is developing projects in Barcelona. So it's a way in which the university meets the city, and we find this very, very exciting. So thank you very much for joining us today, because today is a very special session. We have a very interesting lecture coming from very far away. So Victoria Szabo, she's an expert on digital heritage and digital tools applied to heritage and urban landscape projects. We met in Venice years ago, where she was creating a fascinating project called Visualizing Venice. Victoria, she's coming from the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences at Duke University in the States. So we hope that for her it's going to be interesting to see what we're trying to do in this part of the world, and also for us it's a really nice experience to learn from what they are doing in her department. Victoria is going to offer a seminar inside the master course for our students, but we thought that it would be nice to have an open lecture for everyone, for people from the neighborhood, for people from interested in these issues, that they would have the interest of attending this session. We agreed this title of Smartscapes, but I would like to underline the subtitle, the idea of how we are living this whole revolution. We are living this process of digitalization of life, digitalization of our society. We use cell phones every single moment. We are addicted to WhatsApp, but also we are proposed continuously new experiences regarding landscape and heritage because of these new digital tools. The same concept of digital heritage is just a challenge. What is digital heritage? So we propose Victoria to arrange an open lecture on these different issues, taking advantage of her own projects and her own knowledge on this new dimension of landscape, which has to do directly with new digital technologies. So thank you very much, Victoria, for being with us. So I'm sure that all of us, professors and students and visitors, we are going to enjoy this first of your lectures. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think I'm going to sit down because we have a very complicated setup here, which involves me looking at my slides on one computer and attempting to advance them on the other. So I think it'll make it easier this way. So let's see if this works. So first of all, hello, and thank you very much for having me here. It's very fun to be back here. We were trying to figure out how many years ago it was last time that I came and talked about this topic with an earlier version of your master program. It's exciting to be back. So, let's see. I'm having excitement. Okay, good. So the idea of Smartscapes is one that draws upon the notion of combining a smartphone with a landscape or cityscape to be generated in dialogue with the user's experience. Though today I'll be speaking mainly about augmented reality mobile applications specifically, such interventions are just one of many possible ways to engage urban cultural heritage digitally, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, and each relying upon a base of digital information in dialogue with a place. Given the importance of mobile today and the growth of virtual and augmented reality in our culture, this is an important moment to consider what these technologies can mean for us in these contexts. My examples will be drawn from experimental projects in the Duke University campus, in our surrounding community, the city of Durham, North Carolina, other parts of the state, and then also discussion of work I've done in Venice, since we had our last conversations, as part of an exhibition on the Venetian ghetto, and as part of some teaching that I did there last fall. You can see that there. So the projects I'll be talking about rely upon a notion of cultural heritage, its production and reception as an inherently participatory act. This includes both the type of cultural heritage that manifests in art and architecture, historical texts, objects, artifacts, and structures, as well as that which UNESCO describes as intangible heritage, oral traditions and expressions, language, performing arts, social practices, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship. As they say, such heritage is both traditional and living, it's inclusive, representative and participatory, and is community-based. My argument is that augmented reality is especially well suited to this kind of double intervention, both top-down and bottom-up, and that the technologies can be increasingly deployed by a wide range of practitioners. By introducing this digital element into how we transmit, share, represent, visualize, and reflect upon an inclusive notion of cultural heritage, we further complicate an already complex rhetorical situation and occupy space that has been inhabited not only by academics, but also led by museums, tourism boards, nonprofit heritage organizations, municipalities, and community members themselves, including artists and activists. Augmented reality isn't really new, although the general awareness of its potential has increased in the last few years. A number of practitioners in the art and heritage worlds have been doing work in the field, such as artists and activists like Tamiko Thiel, Copper Gillock, and Cynthia Beth Rubin, who helped to invent the genre in a creative and critical way. Local communities are also leveraging augmented reality toolkits to tell their own stories. For example, Adrian Duke, who shares on-site Indigenous knowledge in Canada using Wikipedia. At the same time, at Sundance's New Frontiers, the broader field of VR and AR in arts and media arts features prominently. At the annual Association for Computing, Machinery, and Computer Graphic and Interactive Techniques Conference, ACM SIGGRAPH, the VR and AR village is going strong. South by Southwest, the famous film and media festival, is also featuring AR as a creative and critical force. And of course, in the game worlds, augmented reality recently gained a foothold through the famous or infamous Pokemon Go, which is how many people were introduced to the idea of AR, alongside the expansive growth of virtual reality more broadly speaking. If virtual reality is already having another moment in time to correspond with the moment of the 1990s, augmented reality is waiting in the wings to become an even more influential component of our daily life, precisely because it's potentially far more pervasive and woven into our everyday practices. Okay. Central to a Smartscape approach to augmented reality is a sense of place. The located places of cultural heritage AR might include represented places, such as those manifested in art, architecture, maps, and writing, in space-time, and represented through images, models, text snippets, videos, and animations. Geometric or locational places produced through GIS and facilitating data-driven analysis, which enable us to see abstracted activity patterns and suggestive adjacencies, and those that create juridical sites and boundaries. Places as sites of production, consumption, and circulation, much like where we are now, of discrete and collective individuals, objects, and phenomena, and referenced places that occur within texts themselves. Geolocations, settings, landscapes, and collation of these may in itself create another register of meaning. The type of location-driven, historically oriented augmented reality I'll be focusing on in my examples draws upon a few core ideas: annotation and overlay, the construction of time and location-based itineraries, exploitation of associative links and nonlinear narration, and database and archive-driven interactions. Now, this field isn't entirely new, as I said earlier, but it's something that's been consolidating for the last several years. So the examples I'll use here are really focused on collaborative work produced within the context of student groups, with museums, and with archives. For us, the production is in itself an educative process, something I know you have experience with as well, highlighting the complex relationships between material cultural artifacts and the para-data associated with them. The exploration of affective and ludic experience design is also an important component of this emerging field and forms an important part of any Smartscape project. As with any new medium, we can tap its potential as a way of engaging the public. I've spoken elsewhere about the idea of apprehending the past, making it appear more relevant to the individual through various modes of engagement, including sensory engagement. I'll talk about that idea in relation to students in a digital storytelling class and as part of my concluding remarks, but also think of it as a way of understanding our experience as coming not only from a digested set of ideas, but as felt, lived experience in on-site and on-location. Before we continue, a review of some key ideas regarding augmented reality for those who might not be familiar with it, to set the stage for what's to come. So location-based augmented reality draws upon geolocation of the viewer to identify content to share at a specific point. Usually this is GPS coordinates, but it can also be established through beacon systems through an indoor environment. The example project shown in the slide here is a City Explorer app that my students made, which focuses mainly on present-day based experiences of what might be called intangible heritage in the making. It was created to provide insight to the city based on a variety of topics and themes identified by them and then put into channels. The point here is to link to multimodal media elements that are integrated in a just-in-time way so that when the user experiences a marker in space and time, they can decide to dig deeper. An alternative to location-based augmented reality experience is one driven by markers or images that are designated as scannable graphics, much like QR codes, or by registering and moving over a 3D model, as in the campus map project shown here, also created by students. As with location-based AR, content links might include text, images, 3D models, websites, audio, video, or social media, so it's really an omni-media presence that we're experiencing here. Such an experience might be oriented or around a stylized map or brochure, or in response to artworks or other visual prompts, or an interior beacon. We're also working on having direct response to architectural elements out in the world. In this case, we have a simple campus map designed by students, complete with their own iconography, and is spatialized according to meaning rather than geographic space, and content selectively based on what they thought would appeal to incoming students. So these are the building blocks. It's worth noting that the same media assets could be deployed using both geolocational and marker-based triggers in any augmented reality system, though the author might want to reframe and reorganize for each anticipated use case. In one case, we might use a geometric trigger within the context of an interior location. In another, we might detach from the material place in favor of a reconceived space made accessible through multiple layers of interpretation. The result is supplemental, situational, and complementary. It could be used on site as well as explored later as a souvenir, book, or flyer. So there's a temporal dimension to these interventions that might determine whether you do a location or marker-based project. Regardless of what's selected, both types of intervention should be perceived as being situational and durational. Platforms change, standards change, and maintenance is a factor as well. The content you create will very likely outlive the viewing device or mechanism, and this is an important thing to think about as you work on a project. If that content also includes a kind of logic for inclusion and a metadata scheme that can be archived, all the better. The example images here are about a project focused on an archive of folk music from the 1930s in North Carolina that we've been bringing to life through archives, timelines, maps, and apps, including augmented reality, but also with a physical installation, an interactive kiosk, and then an archive of interviews. So all of these elements can mix and mingle together, and the question really becomes which ones are best suited to being explored through, in this case, a Smartscape application. Access to information and resources is certainly part of our goal, but not the only one. Part of what we hope to do in our projects is to enrich the idea of annotation beyond the tour book, and to replace it with a more dialogic sense of the place-based augmented reality encounter. For example, this is a counterfactual, I don't know if you can read that. Here we explore annotation and overlay with a geolocative component. Here we also engage with the represented place and the distance between representation and material instantiation. So, to imagine you're visiting Duke University's East Campus, and a geolocated AR app, like the contemporary City Explorer I showed you earlier, you might pull up an historic postcard view of the campus and wonder, what happened to that tower between these two buildings as it's shown on the postcard, which is clearly shown there. Did it get demolished, you might wonder? Well, in fact, we learned that it was never built, or at least it hadn't been built in 1913, despite the so-called evidence of the drawing on the other side of the postcard. Here, our AR intervention, which could be on site in that actual place, is a counterfactual based on an architectural story not implemented in material form. In this case, the presence of absence draws us back into a conversation about the architectic history of a place and the economic and other considerations that continue to affect lived experience in the space today. The AR moment focuses our attention on this disjunction and allows an opportunity to think more about the cultural work being done by the postcard on the one hand as a prospective advertisement, and on how the building of architected space is not an inevitable progression from plan to product on the other. This is a pedagogical point and an historical one. If we wished, we could heighten the effect of the presence of absence by superimposing the ghostly image of a tower upon the view of the existing buildings. My next example addresses the potential of that sort of possibility. In this marker-based example of augmented reality, we bring to life a model atop an image, either of the original or of some other sort of artifact. And as the front end, in this case, of an archive of historical documents around the building of a specific construction. Now, Duke University Chapel was self-consciously modeled in part on older northeastern models of universities from the United States, which in turn were modeled on European university structures. This is a trajectory that we can look at and see through the archives. In this case, we see a copy of the model, which is activated by a brochure. A local visit can be supplemented before or after with a paper artifact. The AR becomes one view or window into, among others, into an archive. The facets of the search are active in space and time. With improved technologies, a ghostly outline of planned or conceived features might eventually limn the structure itself, aiding the reading of the building's surface. The question of what gets modeled, the plan or representation of the finished artifact, and with what fidelity and to what purpose, becomes itself a point of study and potential contention within the context of both this project and the larger modeling process as a whole. A different kind of example of spatio-temporal juxtaposition comes from my own warehouse home, Smith Warehouse at Duke University. This building is physically just across the street from the ones we saw earlier. This is where my department is, and it represents the history of our university in that we were built on tobacco money. Through augmented reality experiences, we can encounter the tension between past and present use of the space, and how that opens up awareness of the human operations that are contained within it and their lingering effects. It draws attention to the economic and social history of our city and the university's place within it. So imagine juxtaposing the historical condition with the contemporary use of the space. How does the past haunt the present? In this example, I'm showing an image as an annotation clearly separate of an interior space, somewhat similar to the previous example technologically, but different in its emphasis. The annotation of the current site with a historic photo could also be combined with other media elements as I described earlier. Or, if we chose to do a more direct and pointed intervention, maybe more emotional and disturbing, through the medium of spatially located AR, we could also populate our contemporary warehouse with tobacco bales, creating a place of experience and as a visible reminder upon what our fortunes have been built. In this case, the AR overlay experience becomes an opportunity to mediate or haunt the location more visibly. Imagine the possibilities here as part of a location-based app where moving through space could also be moving through time, economic circumstance, or material transformation. The idea of walking physically through, at times, contested space and and Time Animated, another AR app centered on Duke's West Campus, this time juxtaposing activist moments and dialogue with contemporary spaces and events, including other activists. Though these images are already shared publicly in the university library archives, images of activist acts on campus, how is it different to present them in this form? What are the implications of this kind of superimposition? Such a potentially political intervention brings up questions of who owns the air on campus and whether creating such experiences tied to particular points can or should be somehow regulated or controlled. This is something augmented reality artists have already had to deal with. GPS points can or should, adding an effective, transgressive, or experiential dimension changes the experience of the archive, creating this dialogic, curated experience of place, potentially quite powerful for being on site. Such work provides the apprehension I spoke about earlier. Apprehension of past experience that's embodied in the user's movements through multiple layers of space and time, and for which one could presumably be apprehended by authorities, maybe not in this example, but in one that's more emotionally charged. As these examples suggest, AR Smartscapes offer an opportunity to consider heritage as both tangible and intangible, material and human. Experience design can include the production of uncanny encounters, the haunting presence of the past, and the production of architectural and cultural memory. The experiences created might include structured itineraries, open-ended exploration, or both. A walk through space could be a walk through time, learning from surrealist, situationist, and psychogeographic practices. So having laid that groundwork, I'd like to turn now to a more extended discussion of one particular project, more fully realized, Get App, which drew upon many of the approaches I've outlined here in our regional projects and experiments. This app this app offered an extended example of the kinds of opportunities these interventions can offer, but its limitations also reflect some of the challenges we face in creating them. It's also a case study for how an international group of researchers work together with a museum and also students to create a Smartscape experience, and reveals to us the focused and partial nature of AR interventions and the overall suite of possibilities. But first, some context. The background to this project is the multi-year, multidisciplinary Visualizing Venice collaboration, in which one of the interdisciplinary labs I'm involved in at Duke, the Wired Lab for Digital Art History and Visual Culture, plays a part. In Visualizing Venice, we work together to explore the city's past on multiple axes and dimensions and sites of transformation and interpretation, art and architecture, but also social, political, economic, and environmental. Questions of placemaking are central to our work as both an historical phenomenon and scholarly practice. Our extended team includes advanced scholars in art history, visual media studies, architects, and engineers, among others. Digital pedagogy is also a key component of the collaboration. We offer undergraduate courses and graduate workshops, drawing on a project-based model in which recurring themes are explored through teaching, research, exhibitions, websites, and apps, often co-authored by students, as well as conventional publications. My areas of particular interest are in digital archives, spatial media, mapping, virtual worlds, and hybrid reality. Our group has a book coming out later this year from Rutledge, plug, that explores some of these topics and ideas. So here's some of the examples of the various ways that we've studied space in relation to Visualizing Venice before the app. You can see that place can be understood as an architected and mapped territory of deliberate confinement, dating back 500 years in the case of the Venetian ghetto. Its representations shed light not only on the specific site, its architecture and artifacts, but also on the construction of knowledge about the wider city. So we might, example, draw from a GIS map, a georectified historic map, the de Barbary 1500 view of the city, various types of photographs and surveys. Or we might choose to do a place-based analysis that might include timelines and maps and extend the notion of place as a node within a broader network of spatio-temporal relations. This is an example of a neat line map that was created by graduate students who were trying to think about the movement of Jews into Venice across space and time and from different historical antecedents. We've also talked about place as a jumping-off point for social history. Here we explored Jewish funeral practices in Venice and the canal construction to move the bodies around the city without interference from other inhabitants. Here we're engaging with specific geographic places, necessary logistics in space and time, and the place of the Jewish community in the city and the subsequent production of on-site cultural memory in the ghetto, the cemetery, the city at large, and the cultural imaginary, so different scales of reference. These sorts of insights went into the recent exhibition in the Palazzo Ducale over in Venice that took place on the occasion of the 500th anniversary of the Venetian ghetto's establishment. So this is a major exhibition that a lot of the Visualizing Venice team members worked on. The app project that we created was just one small offshoot of the larger effort and worked in dialogue with it. It was a mobile app that included AR and other media elements that could be experienced on site and on location in the city, and it continues to exist and have a life after the exhibition is closed. The app itself, therefore, operates as an artifact, the content of which is being improved and expanded upon for a standalone resource and as a potential model for similar interventions in the future. Now, in thinking about how to translate some of the complex themes of the exhibition, rather than taking a comprehensive approach to the ghetto's history, which would after all be an impossible task for any exhibition, we selected specific stops to explore within the city, based both on the quality of the source material we had available and the kind of stories we could reliably tell. In this case, recurring themes of enclosure, densification, complexity, and engagement tie the app project elements together, selectively amplifying aspects of the physical exhibition and drawing upon the built environment to extend the story further. So we really tried to think about what would work well and as embodied experience on site in the city as opposed to in an exhibition nearby. In designing the experience, we focused on evidence-based presentation about real historical figures and structures, the details drawn from archival documents and drawings. The philosophy behind this approach embraces local, partial, but deep histories and draws on Clifford Geertz's notion of thick descriptions as a way of presenting historical and cultural materials in contrast to grand narratives. In our case, built structures function as the expressive agents bearing witness to human events on an experiential, affective level. Location-based AR annotations encourage the user to explore the real space of the ghetto on site in the city, keeping these ideas in mind. We made the contemporary built environment the starting point, the focus, and the lens through which the user might better understand the human as well as the built past. Annotation content for each tour point includes textual descriptions, audio, and instructions for viewing each point of interest, and in most cases, additional bonus content in the form of videos and 3D panoramas. Illustrated here is an example of the geolocated content associated with the German synagogue in the ghetto. It includes a 3D representation of the space to orient the user, models, point cloud video fly-throughs, and to be included in the next version, a detailed photo scan made by our students of an embroidered altar cloth from the Jewish Museum. Here we use augmented reality and pseudo-augmented reality, and I'll get back to that, to explore the contested and constructed site of an historically focused intervention to be experienced in real time. For this project, we used overlaid 360-degree immersive imagery, as well as textual and auditory descriptions. The AR component isn't just the visible overlay, but also the metaphor for how we understand movement through the space. The goal is to create here an effective response to past and present structures, which in turn helps the users apprehend their significance of their building. We cannot yet manage the overlay of building ghosts directly through the camera yet, but we can simulate the experience on site through 360 photos that we took on site and layered with pano-worked 3D models drawn from historical drawings and superimposed at various levels of opacity, if that makes sense. So we have layers of architectural elements that are deliberately made more or less opaque so that you have different types of senses of how you're interacting with the work. The technology is coming. We have high hopes for some of the future tools that will enable us to do tracking directly on the buildings themselves instead of relying on this layered process. Now, the Get Out project is just one way to explore the cultural heritage through place-based digital storytelling. It relied on a great deal of scholarly expertise and a team of experts who were adapting their historical research for a major exhibition. However, related projects can be done at a much smaller scale and with different stances towards heritage contexts and media outcomes. In my digital storytelling class in Venice last fall, I had students focus on ways to tell stories about the city using lots of different technologies, including AR, but also text, We had units on text, image, maps, videos, websites, timelines, panoramas, data visualization, and more. The student projects that resulted reflected a diverse set of engagements with place and cultural heritage, some of which might lend themselves to augmented reality presentation. So I'm going to mention a few of these here to show some of the range of possibilities that the same content might have for being adapted in different viewing formats. So in the example that I have on the screen here, one group chose to follow up on an algorithmic walking project by thinking about how their experience of place was constructed by the built features of that place, and to map in real time, the real time of their walking on a timeline, a time map, which you really can't see here. Another group interviewed visitors to Piazza San Marco to find out what they'd come for and how they were experiencing it. They had a very hard time finding any authentic locals in order to do that, which was interesting in itself, and they juxtaposed their project with statistics on who is actually living in the city. A group that was focused on the Cannaregio region drew upon the idea of digital storytelling as a site of personal meaning making. This was a slower experiential reflection on what individual places came to mean to individuals inhabiting space over time, and was inspired by the book Venice as a Fish, a sensory guide written by Venetian novelist Tiziano Scarpa, who draws the reader's attention to the different sensorial aspects of experiencing the city, through chapters on feet, legs, heart, hands, nose, eyes, etc. These approaches could readily be adapted to a soundwalk experience, for example, or another augmented reality experience that highlighted the non-visual. Yet another student took on the recent UNESCO challenge to Venice's status as a World Heritage Site. It's imperiled because of tourism, environmental degradation, and the cruise ships. Her project explored key local practices that might qualify as intangible heritage: rowing, crochet, and cuisine, and delved into how they're enacted in the city today. Her interviews and other work you could imagine incorporating into an augmented reality project. And if we zoom out a bit, we might look at something like this project focused on the Dolomite Mountains to explore a region and its interconnections. Here again, a multimodal approach to placemaking occurs. The Dolomites, of course, are a source of building materials for the city, wood and marble, for example, that can be traced back in an object history approach to urban monuments. Her project offers us both a top-down illustration of 19th century travel writing and, as a counterpoint, her own new animations of local legends. This is the kind of project that we can imagine having participatory elements created by other users within the community, juxtaposed to those done by historic authors. Another student project that I think is really worth continuing is called Top Walk, which writes the city through exploration of its toponyms or historic street names. This project becomes another way in which placement, mapping, and writing and language come together to create a complex mediated experience of place. Text and place come together. The student here contrasts civic heritage with experiential knowing. As Calvino tells us, walking in the city changes us and the city both. Synchronicity here. Her categories walk, read, learn, know, reflect activated lived experience of the space, and importantly, her longer-term goals are explicitly participatory. In this vision, the informed user would generate local knowledge and share that about the toponyms in the city, thereby creating a common sense of what the city means. Finally, we have things like fictional remediations of a place, of Venice. This would also work very well for Barcelona. Engagement would encourage reflection on how the image of the city is created as a touristic zone and in the cultural imagination. A place written about and represented famously and endlessly that in itself becomes part of its placeness, and this is something that could be explored within the context of a map project, but also something that could be experienced on site. Finally, one last example, a student turned to San Servolo itself, the island where VAU is situated. San Servolo has a history as a quarantine island and then as a mental hospital. His visit to the museum activated the idea to tell a fictional story about a professor who experiences weird events on site. Now, this creative approach captured a certain kind of idea, one of the things that I have wanted to do is work on a project on the Insane Asylum Museum as it manifests on the grounds of the campus. And I'm having trouble getting permission to do that. And you can imagine why. As all of these examples suggest, the category of place in dialogue with the idea of digital cultural heritage yields a number of interesting projects and approaches. This is in keeping with the highly interdisciplinary nature of the field and of visualizing Venice itself, which draws upon many disciplines, including art and architectural history, media studies, informatics and engineering, media arts, publishing, libraries and archives, digital humanities, didactics, museum studies, etc., etc. This diagram had an animated version, but I don't want to make everyone ill. Ta-da! Our core team is meeting up this fall to discuss the expansion of the Visualizing Venice concept to embrace the ideas of visualizing cities more broadly. We're going to be doing a conference in Padua. You should all come. We're eager to see how we might apply the lessons learned through our investigations in North Carolina, and especially in Venice and other regions, to the wider world. For the case of digital cultural heritage, a field and topic that combines at times deeply conservative values with potentially radical media effects, our hope is to realize an academic and pedagogical approach to AR authorship that allows for tangible and intangible heritage to be produced and shared both top-down and bottom-up. Augmented reality represents a way forward that embraces new technologies and their affordances, while at the same time honoring the geni loci of the place. It's a project that will require we come together in less familiar formations to produce our new hybrid realities, and will draw upon the knowledge of all the different people in that spiral. There remain a number of issues, however. There's a digital divide in the production, consumption, and circulation of such technologies. Some expensive authoring platforms exist, but coding and database skills are still needed in many cases in order to do this kind of work. The platforms themselves change frequently, and the tools we use to author and shape them do as well. We continue to encounter the question of who owns the air, as I mentioned, in material, economic, social, and juridical forms. Regulation is unclear, as conflicts around Pokemon Go have highlighted. We are waiting eagerly in my lab the Apple AR Kit release. However, that's also a very proprietary solution. The field is evolving quickly, with the tech world developing new tools and systems constantly. While many of these developments have assisted controlled environment and marker-based uses of AR, they could help create better hybrid open-world effects too, as our urban spaces and places are increasingly scanned, gridded for such production and consumption. So in other words, we're not quite yet in the world where we have total information saturation, but as we get closer, maybe we can find ways to use that productively. I look forward to exploring the possibilities with all of you in the coming discussion and in the coming days, and hopefully beyond that. And so I think at this point I'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Ara ens convidava a fer preguntes i qüestions. Si algú té problemes pel que fa a l'anglès, farem una consecutiva i no hi hauria problema. Per tant, primer la conferència ens ha presentat tota una sèrie de temes de context, per deixar clar que no estem parlant d'ordinadors i de telèfons mòbils, sinó que aquestes eines digitals, hem parlat molt de la realitat ampliada, però no només, canvien moltes coses. Després s'ha explicat projectes concrets que han fet a la seva universitat, projectes dels seus alumnes, al campus de la Universitat Duke i amb l'experiència, just slating, 3 minutes, l'experiència d'aquest projecte Visualizing Venice, que tenia en compte elements de patrimoni però d'una manera molt transversal, perquè es planteja el patrimoni digital, el patrimoni cultural, el patrimoni ambiental, el passat i el present, el tangible i l'intangible, i finalment ens plantejava com a pretext aquesta idea de com hauríem de pensar un projecte que es digués Visualizing Barcelona. Entremig hem tingut molts exemples, per exemple, de com podem treballar amb aquestes eines per impulsar processos participatius, per aprofitar les fotografies de la gent, del lloc, per plantejar, jo he insistit molt en el top-down i bottom-up, és a dir, que alguns projectes poden ser institucionals i d'altres poden ser des del barri. Per tant, ha estat una ponència molt d'obrir, és el que l'havien demanat també, moltes línies de fuga, per tant, si teniu alguna qüestió, algun dubte o algun suggeriment, si no, jo tinc 3 o 4 preguntes al cap, però llançar una primera i així teniu una mica de temps. Since they are just thinking questions, I will just propose one first. I would say one reflection and then one question. The reflection is that there is a kind of a paradox in the sense that we can think that all this technological world about computers is very specialized. This is very close in the focus. And then when you see the applications, you see how it can multiply other concepts we have. So the idea of how we can multiply heritage is very evident in your talk. So you can see how different types of heritage, they can be put together in the same discourse thanks to these tools. Because it's because of these tools that you could have panoramics, you could have pictures, you could have text, you could have all these links you were showing. So this is a kind of paradox. We have an image of how the digital technology is just proposing very close experiences, and then they could help to have a much more broader view on things like heritage. So this is something that I would propose you to say if you agree or not, if you can complement the idea. And then, no, però faltava una segona pregunta, no havia acabat, no? O sigui, aquesta era només l'observació. Llavors, so this is a second of an observation. Maybe we could do something like that. So we could have your chair here. You guys closer to the So, and then the question. I was thinking about how in all these projects you could have a very, let's say, very so open possibilities that you made me think about one of the words you use, which is the word of palimpsest. We have John Roca, the director of the museum here, so he could talk a lot about this idea. So let me put it this way. We are coming from a tradition in which the urban landscape is just a palimpsest. So you go walking in the ensanche, and then the ensanche like us because of so many different reasons, but one of them is that you see elements from different historical moments mixed together. So you could see that whole idea of the palimpsest. The urban landscape is showing different generations of landscapes that they interact together. But the digital tools you were showing, they are very close to the experience of the hypertext. Because the way in which we use internet, I mean, the way in which we find information, it means that you can just check and find the information from so many different points of view. So the idea of the hypertext is different from the idea of the palimpsest. So this is my question. Maybe we are just facing a completely new experience of urban landscape and heritage thanks to the use of these new technologies that we are going to use more and more in the future. So the question is this: is the era of the palimpsest over? We are just beginning a new type of experience of heritage and landscape based on this much more mobile interaction of so many different things together. So this is a question for you, and also John Roca has raised his hand. Bàsicament estava plantejant una primera observació sobre com tendim a pensar que tot el món digital és com molt tancat i molt especialitzat, i el que ens explicava la professora Szabo és que amb aquestes eines tu pots plantejar coses molt diferents, com l'experiència d'un veí a partir de les seves pròpies fotos privades d'un lloc i l'experiència acadèmica juntes. Per tant, aquest món digital ens obre a nous projectes i noves experiències del patrimoni urbà insospitades. I per tant, multipliquem el patrimoni, tangible i intangible, natural i cultural, urbà, no urbà, tot junt, passat i present. I llavors ella ens ensenya una imatge d'una manifestació dels anys 70 en el campus real. Llavors jo li feia broma a Joan Roca, li deia, Joan, igual això, quan parlem de la model, igual podia ser una eina útil per explicar l'experiència de la model. Per tant, una primera observació en aquesta línia. I una segona pregunta, que és dir, tota la manera tradicional en la qual ens aproximem a la ciutat, al paisatge urbà, entén la ciutat, el paisatge urbà, com el resultat de diferents paisatges que al llarg del temps han anat quedant allà, compòsits, de manera que tu tens un palimpsest, que és aquesta idea de que els paisatges es troben tots junts. I tu veus l'últim paisatge però tens restes dels anteriors. La idea de l'hipertext, que és la manera en la qual nosaltres consultem textos a internet, és molt diferent, perquè tu no tens aquelles capes tan clares. I per tant, si nosaltres ara entrem a internet i posem patrimoni, podríem fer una excursió a internet per diferents pàgines web i cap de nosaltres faria la mateixa excursió. Per tant, la pregunta que jo li feia una mica per iniciar el debat és potser les tecnologies digitals ens estan convidant a una completament nova experiència del paisatge urbà i del patrimoni que ja no s'explica a partir de la metàfora del palimpsest, de la presència dels paisatges del passat que encara trobem, sinó d'aquest hipertext que ens convida a una cosa molt més manipulable i àmplia, en la qual el paisatge és un element però apareixen moltes altres coses. En un dels experiments que ella ens plantejava sortien fins i tot les olors i els menjars, per tant, com que no és la meva conferència, ho deixo aquí, però em semblava una mica, com que eren dues preguntes una mica abstractes, potser que quedessin clares. So you have the word now, and then Joan Roca, the director of the museum, who is guilty about this event, he would also take the word.
Well, so I think that the palimpsest is the reality. So, I mean, if you talk about augmented reality, the idea of augmentation is an expansion. It's not, so I don't think that we're substituting the idea of the palimpsest with hypertext. It's hypertext is helping to eliminate the palimpsest. So that you can imagine, it's like a reverse projection map or something like that. So it's not and that's when I was talking about the conservative impulses versus the sort of different kinds of impulses that come from the new technologies. The goal is not to remove you from the presence of the material world and its traces and its partiality and idiosyncrasy, but to think about how to contextualize those elements. So how to map them and frame them so that you can understand better what you're looking at, but not in any way to substitute. When I talked about the idea of creating a model and the difference between creating a model that's based on the actual built structure versus creating a model based on the ideal of the graph, it's a similar kind of thing. We don't want to lose the capacity to understand the things, the historical spaces and places from either perspective. You know, we want to see what the uses were, what the degradation was, what the transformation was in the real world, but at the same time understand what the ideal was. So because the ideal, understanding the ideal gives us a sense of what work that object was doing. So similarly, in looking at the palimpsests of the world around us, we see those traces and we can understand them, and this is a tool for helping to do that, but it's not a substitute.
Well, I don't know exactly how to put my question. Venice. What I saw through the projects you have been talking about Venice is not at all Venice. It's about your way of looking at Venice. Until today, I never could imagine how an American looked at Venice. It was completely incomprehensible for me what was said about Venice. Not because I have an historical point of view about Venice, no, but also about the American city, of what the images about Duke and about the surroundings. It's not at all the way I could look at them. So I'm not sure. Are we talking about new visual methodology, or are we talking about new psychoanalytical methodology? I learned a lot about the Duke students and about yourself today. And I think that after all, hypertext or palimpsest, the ways of looking at things, depend more on the way you have been trained in your community than the way you can use technology. I mean, what I told you that I'm not sure to be able to put my question. I think that after all, that had much more to do with the cultural background of the people producing that approach than with new technologies. That with the same methodology, for example, we would do something completely different. So what I think through that, and I have already seen that in many touristical materials, they are the best psychoanalytical material to talk about people buying them or using them. Not at all a new way of approaching cities. And well, I never realized that until today, so thank you, but what do you think about that?
Let's see. Well, I think you're right. Part of what I'm trying to do so there's two different cases. So the case of the Duke and all that, and talking about the students, was technological experimentation. And so that was setting the stage for trying to think about how to use the technologies in different ways. The Venetian example is slightly different in that it may be shocking to hear, but most of the people involved in that are not Americans. So the people who created most of the materials that we used for the Ghetto project, for example, are architectural historians from the University of Venice and Padua, engineers. So there was very much of an architectural history focus to the content. But it's true, definitely, that the way that the app was created was to create experience in space in order to have the user, the interactor, get some sense of what those themes that I talked about, what the architecture, the historical architecture conveyed. So it was meant to give you an effective and a sort of emotional way of understanding a historical situation. Some of the other content that's associated with that, or that was embedded within that, was about historical reconstructions and trying to understand from plans and maps who the different communities were that were in that space. And so in that sense, there's a social history element. So I take your point that the kinds of things that are being shown are very much shown in these cases with the goal of having individuals engaged or have a connection. And so it is very much, I don't know if it's about me personally, but it's certainly about the idea of creating of a connection, a personal connection and response. So that is one of the values of the specific projects that we're showing. That's not to say that that's the only thing that's valued, but that this is a function of these types of technologies. They're not archival and comprehensive. They're very pointed interventions. And so I talked about augmented reality specifically as something that it is very much about the individual user with their device having an experience in space or with an object. And so what you've made more visible with your question is that that is one of the most useful purposes of using those specific technologies. Now, if you create a digital archive of other types, if you have a comprehensive set of materials or reconstructions that are, on a website or on a model of some other kind, that might have a different sort of purpose. So the examples here really are about the personal internet in your pocket kind of experience in the world. So, but that's a very, it's a very insightful thing.
If I can reply, I must use the microphone. So if well, with your answer, it's perhaps for me easier. So I'm not sure whether we are talking about new ways of city landscape perception or new ways of personal expressionism, which would mean that after all, the distance with the new visual and digital possibilities, the distance with the city is not narrowed but larger. You are not you're not really in touch with the city, but you really create a new world between you and the city. The effort to be really in contact with what you see suffers a kind of substitution by the way in which I express my world facing the city. So in which field are we? And that's very important because that means that after all, we are creating a new reality between us and the city. And perhaps that is as important as the way in which we can use that to really approach the city. I'm not sure.
Well, I think one question to ask is how is this doing that in a different way than other ways of having people interact with the city happen? So one argument you could make, which maybe you are making, is that because this technology is so enticing, and it's creating the substitute worldview that's a simplified worldview that is very much all about the individual and what their feelings are, and not about what's actually out there. That certainly does not have to be the only way it could be used. It's maybe the low-hanging fruit, the easiest way for it to be used. I alluded to, but didn't talk very much about the idea of creating other types of interventions. I think the activist examples or the art examples might be things that could be pushed much further. So at the stage that we are right now, we have this set of tools that could be used in all sorts of ways, but the ways that they're being used is not fully taking advantage of their potential. So I think that's certainly a fair critique to say. This is in its infancy, and the types of projects this is true of any kind of media arts. The thing that all students want to do is talk about themselves. You know, the first website they make is about themselves. The first documentary and the video they make about is their life in their dorm. So there's an element of that comes out in these student experiments. But I think that we are starting to see other kinds of possibilities. We just haven't gotten there yet. And this is why we do need to have participants from all sorts of disciplines coming in and seeing what they can do with it.
Hello. I think most of the confusion comes from the name of augmented reality, because reality, everyone knows what it is, and it cannot be substituted in any way. So it's not really a substitution of the reality, but it's like a new interface. And I think a museum is also dispositive, religious dispositive. Thank you, Bishop. So it's also a way to intermediate between the city and city museum, especially. So in this case, the museum explodes and conquers the city, and you can find evidences of the memory of the city everywhere, not only in a site. But it's not really different from a museum concept, but it's just the way that the content is given to the user. So in that sense, I just make a call not to be catched by the name of augmented reality, because it takes to some conceptual disquisitions that somehow don't really fit the purpose of the technology in this case. And well, I was really interested by one of your examples, the one you told about the Canadian indigenous stories, because one of the things, of course, cities have is a lot of stories. And I don't know of any experience of these kind of applications, especially in Barcelona. But okay, a lot of books have been written in historical cities about the stories, overlaid stories. Also, it's not really monuments, or heritage, but it's. And so, can you tell us a little more about this experience? Thank you.
Yeah, well, so in that example, I didn't do that project, but in those examples, what you're really doing is taking something that already exists, as you say, and making it available in a specific way. So really what the technology does is bring the two things together. So the story would always be there, but maybe it has more of an impact because you're seeing it in the context of a specific location. I mean, that's really the added element. So there's nothing new about it in the sense that you could read the story, you could have a book and read the story while you're standing there, or something like that. So it's really just facilitating. I think that in that sense, the augmented is appropriate because it's augment, extension, annotation, not transformative. And it's again something you could do even with the mobile, so it's a question of discovery and curation, and that's really what you're getting with some of these projects, is making them available in the moment and the time that they might have the greatest impact.
Hi. Something I don't understand is this is exercise we're actually using reality with people, And if they are, or they were, how is the continuity about the users? If you have some general results, I mean, there are, what happened with older people, what happened, or there are more focus for tourism or kids, who are the people that really use there? Are the neighborhoods? What, I mean, talking about users and the result and the objective of the first, like triangle.
Well, I think that the user, the audience differs depending upon what the project is. The North Carolina folk music project that I talked about, there's two different audiences, for example. So one audience is people who are just interested in learning more about the state, and they can drive their car and they can hear historic folk music. But then the other audience is the local musicians who are the inheritors of that musical tradition, who are interested in listening to the historic recordings and then using them to influence their own work today. So it's a repatriation effort in that sense. And so for them, being able to look at a digital archive or listen to a digital archive becomes a way to enrich their senses of themselves and their own histories, and then also to invigorate their musical traditions. For the Get Out project, that was really meant as an extension of an exhibition that was, it's a major museum exhibition, which was both for local audiences and for people who are going to the museum, that wide range of people who might go to the museum. Our hope was that, and this is borne out by what we know of who was using it, is that younger people were interested in playing with the augmented reality component because of the novelty factor, but then they learned more about the region of the city as a result of working with it. And our hope too was that it would draw people into the exhibition itself, so that it would be both a supplement to the physical exhibition and something that could exist in its own right later. So it varies a lot.
Good evening. I have a question about maybe what type of results are you expecting from apps? So how can you count this interaction? Or it's more about the experience, like let's do like this and we will see if it works or not, but basically you're always setting some kind of a question. So you are showing something for doing what? So this is the question. For me, it's not very clear. So,
I think I indirectly alluded to this in my last answer. In some ways, what we have been doing is trying to drive people into the archive. So it's an attractor to get deeper engagement with other richer content. So a way to, if you're in an architected space, you can learn a little bit and then it'll pull you into wanting to learn more. And so the measure might be whether people are actually extending in, so jumping out of the self-contained experience and into another type of environment where they're paying more attention to other historical resources that might have been generated. So I guess it's kind of advertising in that sort of way. It just depends a lot on what the purposes of the project is when you're creating it. If it's a self-contained experience, then it's to have an enriched engagement with something you may not have paid attention to before. So it's the constant tension with these augmented reality projects is that, at least for me, we still want you to actually experience the place that you're in and not forget about the place that you're in. And so this is why the first question is such an important one, because if it just becomes another version of you looking at the city through your smartphone, then what's the point? The question is there a way to have the smartphone be there with you and yet not take over your entire experience of the space? And that's a hard one. That's something that sometimes less is more. Maybe you don't use any visuals and you only use audio because you're trying to maintain the visual field, or maybe it's about following an itinerary but then breaking the itinerary. You know, it's how much guidance is too much guidance. And that's part of where too having small bits of information rather than the information overload can be useful. But it's these are all open questions.
Just a small question. How do you engage people in this kind of projects? How do you make them participate in this kind of exercise?
So, you mean how do people use the application, or how do they create the application?
How do you make people get engaged in what you are proposing them to enact with?
To interact with. Well, I talked about the ludic, the gamified dimensions of things. I'm always a little bit hesitant about that myself, you know, turning everything into a game. But having a happening or having an event that is associated with the using of the project, or doing it in a group, or having people write comments and feedback that they can share with each other. I mean, those are different ways to have it feel like a collective experience. Are you familiar with alternate reality games?
No, engagement is, for instance, if you are, no, but it's something else. So in your projects, so with your students, you are like enacting with people directly, with history, with the city. So my question is, how do you engage or the students or your audience in using those platforms? Like, is there a method, or do you make these happenings be, or how do you like make people to engage with this projects? Is this the question? It's just the interaction with people. Yeah.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question. So I think this is not a good long-term answer, but I think right now the novelty factor is strong. So people understand that augmented reality exists so far in these games or in Yelp reviews or things like that. And so if you see that there is a project that's done for another purpose, then that can be interesting just because someone is familiar with the technology, and then by being familiar with the technology they become engaged, so it's an entry point. Yeah, the happenings, we've done some of that, you know, so have a launch event so that people are doing it together and talking about it with each other and taking photos of each other, you know, that sort of thing. But I think some of it is just, especially if it's a museum piece, it's really another way of getting enriched information. So it's another modality, you know, so you might be looking at an imagery like on a kiosk, and then you might have this other component. It's just one of the many ways of getting information, and people are drawn to it if they're drawn to it, I guess.
Thank you. Let me ask, during your presentation you emphasized the term of augmented reality as opposed to virtual reality. And it seems to me, or at least it seemed to me, that you focus mainly on delivering the content as opposed to, let's say, interaction, which is a kind of ongoing trend in the, for instance, gaming industry right now, right? Because we are now facing the ongoing revolution in the virtual reality industry. For example, all the manufacturers of the smartphones from the next year will be heavily focused on this, right? We will be having this lens, HoloLens, Google Lens support And the main debate which is ongoing in the, let's say, gaming industry is that there is augmented reality or delivery of content, and as opposed to interaction, and kind of for the gaming industry, the model of passive content delivery proved to be not that engaging, and that's why this Pokemon Go failed actually after the first hype. The Ingress predecessor of Pokemon Go dissolved, though it was very interesting and very engaging. The truth is that at least the gaming industry and the entertainment industry trend is about interaction. Maybe you can highlight your ideas about the interaction scene, because on one hand we have something landscape, cultural landscape, which could be more towards, let's say, history, but on the other hand we have this interaction challenge. So.
Well, I think there's some elements of interaction that would go, going to the hypermedia idea, the hypertext elements of being able to create pathways and trails, or participatory media elements in these kinds of projects. But once you start getting beyond that, it becomes a programming challenge that would be very difficult for most people who are not in that field to pursue. We've seen a lot of failed educational games. And I mean, I've seen very few that I would claim succeeded. So I think we have a similar sort of problem here. If you want to create interaction in the sense of having goal-oriented objectives, you could certainly structure that in. But could they have the inherent meaning and not just be, getting badges or points or something like that? I think that would be very unappealing to a lot of people, at least in certain kinds of contexts. We saw that the gamification of culture and education becoming really prominent for a few years, and then there's a little bit of resistance to it again now. So, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't come up with other types of interactive experiences, but what would those be, and how would they enrich the experience of being in the place? Or at that point, are you getting out of augmented reality and are you back in virtual reality? Because we have even more of an overlay of structure. So this is where things like alternate reality games that I mentioned earlier come in, where you might have augmented reality components, but you have this whole other narrative going on that's intentionally and deliberately outside of the sphere of everyday life. So if you create interactive experiences within augmented reality, you really are starting to move it further and further away into your own little world that is separate. That doesn't mean that wouldn't be an interesting thing to try, but it takes us in another way.
I'm not an architect, I'm an anthropologist, so following her question, I was thinking that, like, for us anthropologists, listening to storytelling is what we do, so it was not a main problem for me to understand how people engage into your project, but for me, this really calls for the necessity to really make things interdisciplinary, because there's no way, I don't have a clue of any of the computer part, but I'm just thinking about how we're going to do that in a way that we can talk to each other in different languages that make sense, because her question about how you engage people is okay, this is my really easy thing, because this is what I do in my everyday life. I just sit in a place and listen to people telling me stories about the places in this old city, but I never thought about that kind of jump to make that part of a participatory process to create knowledge. So I really appreciate your talk, because it opened me a lot of possibilities of things that I don't know about digital media, so really like it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's still there. Yeah, so this slide shows you the different roles that I have. And I think that this talk is a little bit of a product of these different roles. So there's a program called Information Science and Studies, which is focused on the exploration of new technologies. That's kind of what we do. And so a lot of the demo projects that I showed you were in the context of that. So the study and creation of new technologies and their impact in different dimensions. And so we can certainly spend time thinking about the technology from the perspective of how do you do it and what are some of the things that you can do with it in a generalized kind of way. But then we get into the much broader questions of what should we and why and how will we theorize it and how will we critique the things that we're doing. And are they ethical? Are they desirable? Are they taking away from other modalities that are actually richer or better, but are not as trendy or something like that? You know, so trying to engage with something as complicated as the cultural phenomenon that is augmented reality, we could take it from any number of angles. There's the literal, how do you do it? And then are the mechanisms that are available, that are accessible to us if you're not a programmer, already structuring the experience so much in a way that we won't value that maybe we shouldn't even do it. So this is similar to what happened with, I think, with when a lot of academics and humanists and artists became interested in mapping, and they started using GIS software or used things that were derived from GIS software. And so suddenly you have 100 projects based on the WGS 84 datum, and suddenly the whole world is being described in a certain type of map format, whether or not that mechanism was actually the most effective way to tell stories about space, or whether using it would end up distorting historical representations of space because they weren't based on that. You know, there's all sorts of things that happen when you borrow the tools of another discipline and then try to think about how to wrest them in the direction of your own interests. And I feel like we're at that place right now with augmented reality, where the concept is there, this idea of contextual annotation with other media elements, and all the different things that we can do with it. But increasingly, the tools for producing that kind of project are very expensive. They're either overly simplified, WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, graphical user interface tools that encourage you to work in certain ways, or you have to code it yourself. And if you have to code it yourself part, we don't have enough templates or structures that have been generated by our community in order to do it effectively. And so you either do something from scratch that doesn't have interactivity or complexity in it because it's really, really hard, or you do something that has certain types of overlays and other systems that have been valued by the industry, which then results in already having canonical ways of doing things before all of us have even gotten a chance to work with the tools. And we also have a lot of platforms that get created and then cease to exist after a year or two. And so if you have materials that you've lovingly arranged in novel creations, novel structures, they can go away. So in some ways what we need to be doing is theorizing augmented reality separate from all the technologies and thinking about what it is that we want to do with it. But the people who theorize it have to understand something of what goes into its structure, and the potentials of it, so that they can bring those insights to bear on the development process. And that's the interdisciplinary collaboration that needs to happen. So I mentioned briefly that augmented reality and virtual reality are both having a cultural moment, in that you're seeing in the movie industry and the computer graphics industry and in academia and in heritage organizations and in games, this convergence around the technology and also around mobile. But then what do we do with that? In some ways, this is also similar to what happened when the World Wide Web first came out. I mean, I won't say this is as important as an event maybe, but it's, you know, it's part of that extended trajectory where I remember creating the first website for the English department at my graduate school, because why should we have websites? You know, the library was thinking, oh, maybe we'll have a website. Oh, I don't know if we want to have a website. You know, and then the world changed, and now we can't imagine being without them. But it's because we don't think of the web as one thing anymore. It's just, it's a medium, just like writing is a medium, or maybe not exactly like, but you know, but it's diversified and it's complexified, and that will happen with this type of annotation on space and time and location, because the gridded world is already here, at least in certain areas, and it's going to be even more here and more pervasive. And so we'll, whatever we think of it, we'll need to address it, even if it's to shut it out. And that's always been my argument for thinking about new media forms within the context of arts and humanities, especially. That whether we like it or not, it exists, and it's our duty, it's our moral duty to engage with it in a critically engaged way, even if it's to reject it. We're in early stages. This is the part where we can all potentially do something better with it, or marshal arguments for why we shouldn't do it.
Last question.
If it's not the case, I would say that this last point take us to the very beginning, because we will discuss about this in another moment, but I don't completely agree with the idea that augmented reality is just complementing. I think that it's really changing the way in which we are approaching landscape. In the same way, speed, we are living in the civilization of speed, is also changing the phenomenon, just because the way we are accelerating them. But I didn't want to finish with that. I wanted to finish just also, of course, thanking Victoria for this fantastic talk, and the people who came with us for the questions, all of them very interesting. I wanted to close with one last reflection about the ordinary landscape and the ordinary heritage. Because I think, you would correct me if not, that the first experiences dealing with augmented reality, they were focused on magnificent heritage elements. So I remember people using augmented reality in Notre Dame de Paris. So we have moved from that element supporting the perception or enjoying those key highlights of tourism, of heritage, to the storytelling. An example of the Canadian indigenous stories makes me think about how could we explain the stories about Barcelona. The stories about the slavery in Barcelona that we don't know, but we know that they exist. The stories about fascinating stories like the Cabetians, the followers of Etienne Cabet in Poblenou, the stories about the memory erased by the Olympic project in the waterfront. So all those stories, they could be present in a very much more effective way thanks to this technology. So we're talking about how, this would be the remark, how these digital technologies, particularly augmented reality, could be a very effective tool to work with these ordinary elements regarding memory, heritage, history, and making this new link between landscape and heritage. Since this is basically one of the main motto of our masters, of our program, this is a very good point to close the session, because now we are going to have tomorrow and on Friday this seminar with Victoria, so I invite all the students to work hard and to enjoy the exercises that Victoria is going to pose to you. And I wanted to invite you all as well to our last conference, which is also dealing with ordinary landscapes in a different way. Our fourth and last conference is going to be next Wednesday, 26th July, at 6 o'clock in the MUHBA, in the main headquarters, let's say, in Plaza del Rey. We're going to have Simon Morley, who is an expert on the sublime, the idea of the sublime and the landscape. He's coming from South Korea University, Bangkok University in South Korea, and he's going to offer this lecture about this very intriguing idea. The landscapes that they use to put us in that situation in which you were experimenting with the sublime, oceans, forests, deserts, mountains, they are protected now. Because we have such a capability to destroy nature that we need to protect them. So they are not fearing us anymore. We are protecting them because we think that we can be able to destroy them. So they have no power to make us experiment the feeling of the sublime. So either the sublime is over, or either we can find other landscapes that they are communicating in a much more efficient way than the other sublime. This is one of these landscapes. We have one of these landscapes in Barcelona. So we are going to have this last session on the new landscapes approaching us to the sublime, and we're going to finish with a very special end of the session with some collection of photographs that were taken during the last 15 days in which the Santa Maria de Resource Power Plant Station was already working in 2010. So we have some pictures that they were storytelling, and now they are a historical document because they were showing the elements that they have been completely removed from the power station. These images, they have been digitally arranged with some sound, so we are going to have the soundscape of the power station, which now is just an element of heritage, because it's something that has disappeared. So I would like you to invite you to this very special session, which is going to close this 4 series of conferences on emerging urban landscapes, singular legacies in Barcelona. So I would like to thank Oliva Artés team, especially Felipe, who has been very effective running with the microphone and helping us with all the necessities we had to arrange this session. Also thanking you for coming, especially Victoria for being with us, and of course to the MUHBA and Joan Roca for making possible these conferences, working together with the masters. So thank you very much. See you, the students, tomorrow, and those of you that you would like to join us on 26 July, in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Thank you.